It is totally okay for our emotions to come up. They are very unique and like natural to our human experience. So our presentation is really going to focus around our emotions, bringing some understanding and awareness to those emotions, and perhaps we'll be able to share some helpful strategies to be able to cope with those emotions, just overall with the intention to have like a greater balance with them. So this is just like a general agenda, what we're going to be talking about. We're also going to have a different mindfulness practice and just reflect on like different layers of our emotions. And we'll have like some time at the end for questions. Just a reminder for questions, just to pop them in the Q&A section of our presentation. And we will take questions at the end. So we wanted to start by showing this around depression. So we do like really like normalize that if you're experiencing any of these things that are here on the screen, they're part of the symptoms of depression. So depression can have like different layers to it, and they are like really closely interconnected. So a common theme of depression can be like thoughts that can be like quite negative, pessimistic. We can have thoughts around either ourselves or others of things are never going to get better. I will never be able to get through this, quite like all or nothing language. And also thoughts around like hopelessness, that again, like things are not going to change, or about ourselves of I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. And these thoughts can be like quite heavy, because having these thoughts can then have like a trickle effect in terms of how we're feeling emotionally, how our body feels in those moments, and also how it affects our behavior. So when we have thoughts that are quite negative, and again, it's nothing that is our fault in any way, but it's just like part of how the symptoms of depression can often present. And with that, there can be emotions like low mood, sadness, depressed mood, feeling like quite irritable, feelings of guilt and shame. And when we have our emotions, we also experience them physically. So perhaps as we were going through the practice, you may have noticed when you noticed a certain emotion that maybe also in your body, you're like, oh, maybe I feel some tension in a particular place in my body. And that's also, again, like quite natural part of our emotions. And for depression, things could be like difficulty sleeping, like low energy, changes in appetite, whether it's like eating more or eating less. And when you take into consideration our thinking, our how we feel, and how it felt in our body as well, understandably so, it's going to affect how we respond. So that could look like withdrawing from others, not having as much interest in doing things, just lower motivation. Because if we're having like thoughts telling us that things are not going to change, and then we don't have any energy, then understandably so, it's just going to be quite difficult to be able to get motivated to do things. And the intention is just to like be able to notice these things, because these are clues that tell us like how we're feeling in the moment, to then be able to take some action from it. So I'm gonna like take a moment for people to like reflect on whether like you notice any of these for yourself. And this is like the meat and butter of our presentation today. This different three systems, which are the systems that are grounded of our emotions. And all of the emotions that we experience have an evolutionary component where they evolve for a particular reason based on the needs that we've had as humans throughout many moons ago. And these emotions have just allowed us to stay alive as humans. They have allowed us to survive, even though sometimes we may feel an emotion and we're like, why am I feeling like this? Like it's just too much, it's too heavy. But yet they help us. And I really want to honor that all of the emotions that we have, they have a particular function. So one of the emotions that we have, they're rooted in our threat system, which is the system right at the bottom, the red one. And the threat system, it evolved to allow us to survive and keep ourselves protected from any danger. So back in caveman days, it may have been lion and animals that were around us, and like they were around, and we needed to be like on the lookout, because if we were not on the lookout, we would be eaten by an animal. And nowadays, we still hold on to those emotions related to the threat system, because there's still dangers in our real world today. So perhaps I won't see a lion out on the street right now if I go outside. Well, hopefully not. But maybe when I'm out camping, I may run into a bear, and I'm going to need my threat system to get active in order to protect me from that bear. If I didn't have that anxiety in the moment, then I wouldn't take action in the moment. So we do need that threat system for that. And also part of it is also we can feel like anger and also disgust. And the system works in a better safe than sorry, where like it is really focused on keeping us safe. But we'll get more into like each of the systems. The other one is the drive system, and it evolved to allow us to be motivated, to gather any resources that we need, again, to keep us alive. And in the world today, we still need this to gather resources, shelter, acquiring things, and also with relationships, to nurture relationships and get like that good feeling with our relationships. And with this, like different things kick in, like dopamine kicks in, it feels good. We want to pursue, we want to achieve things when the drive system kicks in. The other system is the soothing system, where we have feelings of staying connected, safe, protected, and care for others. And it helps us to stay grounded through safe relationships that we have in our lives. So I want to invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on your last week and draw, if you have paper handy, or even just think of what system was most active for you last week in terms of like the size. So you may even draw for yourself the 3 circles. So if there's a system that wasn't as active, you would draw it as smaller. If there was one that was more active, I invite you to draw it like in a bigger size. Just to like reflect back on, perhaps I noticed that maybe I'm too much on the drive system or the threat system, and maybe I'm not tapping enough in the soothing, or whatever that looks like for you. I'll give people a couple of moments just to think back on these. And we're going to bring up a poll. So a poll is going to pop out in your screen with a question for you to just putting as an option, what was the system that was most active in the last week? We'll give folks a couple of moments to put in their answers. Okay, thank you all for participating. I can see things starting to come in. Okay, and then we can share the results. People able to see the results? Okay, so we can really say that perhaps like that threat system was quite active for most, and the drive system. So that like pursuing, achieving, and also that perhaps like that anxiety piece, that threat that may come up, but the soothing system was perhaps like smaller. And we'll do a second poll around which one was the least active for you. Which I'm already guessing the answer based on the last one, but we'll take a stab at it. Okay. So we can see that that soothing system was like primarily not as active. So just good awareness to have, and we'll really talk about different strategies to be able to tap into the other systems. Because the idea is that we want to be able to keep a balance within the systems, because they are all very closely interconnected, and they feel like they regulate each other. So I won't get too much into it. The threat system, we already talked about it, but it can be seen like as our like immune system, where our immune system really attends to any threat or like any virus, if you think of like the physical immune system, but it attends to any threat, process what's going on with that threat, and then we respond to that threat like right in the moment. And that response can look like in so many different ways. It could even be like automatically, if I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to start to perhaps have an increase in heart rate. My breathing is going to change. Maybe I'll notice some like tension in my body. And if I do have that lion coming to me right now, automatically I'm going to have that response of anxiety, because my nervous system is kicking in and it's going to keep me safe from that lion. So I'm either going to fly very, very quickly, get out of here, or maybe it's just so much that I'm going to shut down and I'm going to like get really small. And that can happen. We all have like different ways that we respond to a threat. It could be like a threat that we have right in front of us. So it could be a perceived threat, which could be like thinking that we have, where we're perhaps having catastrophic thoughts about something that's going to happen in the future. And that can have like the similar effect where we may freeze and we may want to fight in the moment. And the way that we talk about ourselves and the way that we perceive a situation can also activate the threat system. So I would invite folks to like just like keep an eye in terms of like what's going through your mind. As part of like that threat system, there's like a negativity bias where we do focus like in the worst case scenario, or we focus on like the one time that something went wrong. If I've had a presentation in the past that perhaps like it wasn't the best, maybe I was slurring my words, and then I'm presenting again today, my mind is automatically going to go like that one time that it didn't go well, but it doesn't consider like all of the other times that things were okay. So it's not our fault that our brain is tricky in that way, that we focus on the negative or like that worst case scenario. Yet again, that's part of the way that our brain has been trained to keep us alive and surviving. But we can just be aware of this, especially when our threat system is active, because it can amplify this type of thinking, or the type of thinking can then activate the threat system. So here's just like some examples, and also ways that we can combat that. So we have the negative filter of only kind of like focusing on the evidence. Like I can never get anything right when supporting my partner. Like if we're thinking like as a caregiver, we want to consider the helpful side of that and looking at the positives. Like, you know what, perhaps there's been times that I've been able to provide support. Another type of unhelpful thinking can be mind reading, where we make assumptions about how others are thinking. No one cares about me, which is something like quite common that we hear through like the depressive lens of things. And we want to be able to like face up the facts instead of thinking about the interpretations about a situation. Labeling as well can come up, where we just like label ourselves as like I'm stupid because I made a mistake, but rather trying to like try to stay away from those labels and really focusing on the facts of a situation. So that's like the general sense of the threat system, but I'll pass it on to Hannah to share with us more information about the drive system.
Thank you, Cristina. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be with you all today. So I'm going to talk more about our drive system now, remembering that this is a motivating system that helps us move towards what we want and need, and it activates our reward system to make us feel good when we achieve goals and supports us with a drive towards building positive relationships. And when we did the poll earlier, some of you felt the system was active, which is great. And it wasn't active for some. And it can be really challenging because depression can keep us away from doing things that bring that enjoyment, achievement, or meaning to our lives. There can be a strong urge to isolate, or things that used to feel enjoyable may no longer feel rewarding. And the drive system can become quite dampened when experiencing depression. And we can think of it as that circle growing smaller. And it's really hard to still engage in activities when feeling this way. And it can be natural, totally natural, just to want to wait until that low mood passes and motivation to engage in activities comes. But the challenge is that with depression, that urge to isolate and reduced ability to experience enjoyment can last for a while. And avoidance and isolation can cause a downward spiral that can really make things feel worse. So as long as we're following the lead of depressed moods, we'll continue to feel less motivated and want to avoid and isolate even more. And a way to activate our drive system to help grow it and help break the cycle when feeling low is through behavioral activation. So behavioral activation means using behavior to influence our emotional state. And it's based on the premise that behavior needs to change before emotions and motivation will improve. And the idea is that the more we activate, the more situations we find ourselves in that have potential to give a positive experience. As an example, you may have had a time where someone asked you to go for a walk and you really didn't want to go. I know I have. And your first thoughts may have been about how you feel tired, or you don't have time, or you may have experienced a really strong urge to stay isolated if experiencing depression. However, you were able to muster up some strength to go, and then found you did feel better once you were out. It went a little bit better than expected, maybe from the sun or some distraction, and then maybe found that you had some momentum to do some other activities around your house afterwards. And ways that we can do behavioral activation from a practical perspective include monitoring our daily activities and working to build an upward spiral through engaging in more activities that have potential to bring pleasure or a feeling of achievement, identifying values, things that are meaningful for us, and creating doable goals to participate in those values, activity scheduling, problem solving around potential barriers, such as low mood, negative self-talk, lack of time, or having low energy. So let's talk about some ways that we can engage in behavioral activation more specifically. So BASE stands for 4 areas that can be beneficial for our overall health: body care, achievement, connection, and enjoyment. That can be helpful to try to incorporate into each day, at least one thing in each area. So in terms of body care, it can be helpful just to take a moment and ask ourselves, okay, how have I looked after my physical body today? Things like eating healthy food, exercise, drinking water are vital to our well-being, but often we can minimize how powerful the impact our physical body has on our mental health, or it can be really easy to forget to look after basic physical needs if busy caring for others, or things can be more challenging. For example, if experience that physical fatigue due to depression. So we may need to bring a little bit of an extra sense of gentleness, a little bit of extra thought in terms of how we might make physical care for the body a little bit easier, or schedule reminders for ourselves to do things like remembering to drink water. A stands for achievement. So it can be really difficult to see all the good things we do achieve in a day when feeling stressed or low. And we often concentrate on all the things we didn't manage to do. And if that threat system Cristina just mentioned is activated, ways that we're failing are going to be more top of mind. And dwelling on these can increase a sense of helplessness that can grow that threat system even more. And writing achievements down, no matter how small they may seem, can create a shift in terms of taking time to recognize the things that we are doing that our brain might not naturally give ourselves credit for, and increase feelings of control and then building momentum to do more. And for achievements, it's really about meeting yourself where you're at. Some days doing things like doing the dishes may be a big achievement, given the amount of time you're having or how you're feeling. And it's really important to acknowledge that rather than discount it. So it may be helpful to ask yourself something like, what would I say to a friend who is dealing with everything that I have on my plate right now? Or who is struggling with the low mood and fatigue that I'm experiencing? Would I tell them that it was no big deal? Or would I tell them that it's something worth recognizing, that they were still, for example, able to get groceries, given everything that they have going on? Just taking a moment, even if it feels like a stretch, to recognize things that are an achievement for ourselves. So C stands for connection. Thinking about how we can set aside time, at least once a day, to meaningfully connect with a friend, family, your partner, or a pet. Every day is hugely important for emotional support and our self-care. And even doing something small, like texting a friend, can be really helpful to break that cycle of low mood that wants to keep us isolated, or to help keep ourselves whole and supported if in a caring role for others. And it can be helpful to notice if we're falling into all or nothing thinking. We might think, I don't have the time, or I don't have the energy to go to a social gathering, so I'm not going to do anything. But remembering that even just sending that small text, for example, can still have an impact on the connection that we're experiencing. And lastly, that E stands for enjoyment, which can be really challenging if experiencing depression. We've talked about you or your loved one may not feel like doing enjoyable activities. It can be helpful to think about scheduling at least one enjoyable activity every day and keeping that as if you would a doctor's appointment, or thinking about something really meaningful in your schedule. And maybe starting small or for just a few moments at a time to help you build momentum to do more. And thoughts may arise, like thoughts of, what's the point? I'm not going to enjoy it anyway. Those types of thoughts could come up. And it can be helpful to recognize these thoughts as influenced by a depressed mood and not necessarily true. Can also be helpful just to frame it as at least giving yourself a chance to experience a positive event. And if you don't feel like doing an activity, seeing if you can do it partially or even just for a few minutes. Remembering that often we don't get that feeling of motivation to do things until we actually get started. And then we help our drive system to get more activated. But the behavior needs to come before the motivation sometimes. Thoughts may also come up about not having time to do enjoyable activities, which is understandable, especially if you're in a really busy role as a caregiver. And it can be helpful to think about how even just 5 minutes of an enjoyable activity is still nourishing for us and can activate our drive system and then increase energy to help us to then give more to the people we're caring for once we've taken that moment to care for ourselves. If you find yourself just really stuck or dwelling on negative thoughts when you try to do enjoyable activities, it can be really helpful just to think about seeing if you can gently encourage yourself to refocus on the activity itself and look for something to feel good about with it, whether there's a sense of pleasure, accomplishment, or even just recognizing I've overcome avoidance here to try this. And try not to get discouraged if you keep returning to negative thoughts, because this can be common when experiencing low moods or when we're feeling stressed and that threat system is activated. You might need to pull yourself back to look for the good parts of the activity hundreds of times. But even just being mindful that you're starting to drift into that negative thinking can give us a choice to try to do something a little bit different and refocus. For some, especially those who have been depressed for a long time, having difficulty experiencing any positive mood or any feelings of enjoyment can be really difficult. And the thought of looking for something to feel good about in an activity may seem impossible right now. And if this is the case for you or a loved one in your life, it can be helpful to start to think about capturing very tiny positive experiences using the 5 senses. So a way to do this can be to start with noticing your 5 senses as you go through your day. So maybe noticing textures, sounds, smells, or sights that you find even a little bit enjoyable. An example, maybe it's too much right now to think about enjoying a whole meal or all of a walk. But thinking about, was there even just a small taste of that meal that was a little bit pleasant? Or was there a tiny moment of a positive reaction to something, such as even just the sight of a puppy, for example, on your walk? And thinking about when we deliberately make this choice to look for positives in our day, it's like we've cracked a window open. And then we're starting to allow these positive experiences in, and we have something to build on. And over time, it will become easier to experience positive moods more regularly and for longer periods once we've started this. So it can be helpful to use a base diary like this that we'll send out to everyone and stick it where you can easily access it. You can plan something that you'll do each day or as a goal to do in each of the 4 self-care areas, and then check them off at the end of each day as a way of noting these achievements. And space to comment on how the activity went is there to help prompt reflection. And some helpful things to think about are, how did the activity impact your mood? Did it feel nourishing or depleting? Is there a way to build more opportunity to participate in activities that have the potential to feel pleasant or that bring up feelings of achievement? And if you identify activities that feel really depleting or draining, it can be helpful to think about, what are some ways I could make this less depleting for myself, such as pairing it with something more pleasant, like listening to music when washing dishes or drinking a favorite tea when paying bills. It may feel like a lot to think about starting a full base diary right now, and that's okay. So it may be helpful to think about setting a goal to increase your participation in one area of the base diary, such as enjoyment. And it can be helpful to set SMART goals when thinking about goal setting. So when we set SMART goals, we're setting goals that are specific and well-defined to help us to really narrow down exactly what we want to achieve. So for example, instead of saying, I want to exercise more, something more specific could be, I want to increase the amount I walk outside. And it's also important to make our goals measurable so we know if we're achieving them. So I could say, I want to increase the amount I walk outside by going for a 10-minute walk every day. And it's helpful to check in whether the goal is attainable. So maybe walking every day is too much for right now. It's more attainable to set a goal to walk for 10 minutes at least 3 times in a week. And our goals should be realistic and based on realities of our circumstances, support, or energy we have available. So my current goal of walking outside 3 times may be achievable and it's been really nice out lately. But our Canadian weather can throw different things at us. So it might be more realistic for me to think about places I could walk indoors if needed as a way of problem solving rain, as an example, as a potential barrier to the school ahead of time. And lastly, it can be helpful to set a time frame for goals so we have a clear target to work towards, such as achieving this goal within a month. So now that we've talked about how we can activate this drive system through using behavioral activation strategies like the BASE diary, reflecting on our activities, and SMART goal setting, we're wondering if we can take a brief pause here for everyone to reflect on and type into the chat whether there's an activity that you're already doing that brings you a sense of enjoyment or achievement that you could try to do more of, or whether there's something that you'd like to set a goal to try. And please, if you feel comfortable typing your answers into the chat, making sure to go into the chat rather than the Q&A, if you feel comfortable sharing, as your ideas may be helpful or encouraging to others. So just reflecting and sharing if you feel comfortable. Is there an activity that you're already doing that brings you a sense of enjoyment or achievement that you could try and do more of? Or whether there's something you'd like to set a goal to try. And I'm seeing in the chat here, sitting beside an open window. I love that. Thank you, Layla. Any thoughts from others? Seeing I try to go for a walk every day around my neighborhood. That's great. Spend 20 minutes at the gym 3 days a week to help me de-stress. Excellent. And that's a really good example of that SMART goal framework coming through. I walk every day, first thing in the morning. I'm seeing doing Pilates. Excellent. And walking outside, enjoying nature. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. Feel free to pop other things into the chat if you'd like. I'm going to pass things over just for time to Laura now to talk about our soothing system.
Thank you, Hannah and Cristina, and thank you for everyone for attending today. So it was interesting to do that poll earlier to see that we might have more familiarity with our drive and threat systems compared to our third and final system, which is the soothing system. Especially as we're talking about these systems within a mental health setting, the soothing system might also be something that seems quite unfamiliar or sometimes maybe out of reach based on your circumstances, whether you're somebody living with a mental health concern or caregiving for somebody with such a challenge. But the soothing system, of course, is a very important one. So in the previous systems that we talked about, especially our threat system, that's when we're feeling stressed. We can feel that feeling of adrenaline or tension, racing thoughts, the really challenging emotions. But in comparison to that, with the soothing system, we can feel a sense of contentment. We can have a reduced heart rate, slower rate of breathing, and be able to, instead of be in our fight or flight, we can be in a state of rest and digest. And what this refers to is having a little bit more emotional and physical resources to let our guard down, to take some time to be with ourselves and to rest, and to focus on physical functions not related to immediate survival, like coming around the corner to a lion. And when we have those extra emotional resources for ourselves, we're much better able to have space and energy to connect with other people. It might sound familiar that if you yourself are feeling emotional, down, stressed, overwhelmed, being able to give that emotional energy to somebody else might be really challenging and maybe overwhelm you more. But when the soothing system is able to be activated, we have more space for that kind of connection with others. Talked a lot about safety, especially with that threat system, but from kind of this perspective, we can also talk about the idea of safeness. So the threat system can deal with safety, meaning trying to mitigate our risk and prevent harm to ourselves. But with safeness, with the soothing system, we can look at it as a way of being able to rest and have more time and space to be open to things like looking at our own values, our goals, feeling perhaps open to trust with other people and have that connection with others. We can acknowledge that the other two systems that we talked about are also very important. But with the soothing system, the idea is not to soothe away the emotions that we might have. We still want to have those, but be in a place where we can feel those feelings, acknowledge them, and tolerate them, and still be in a state of mind where we can act and think efficiently, which is very important, especially when we're talking about caring for other people. But again, interesting to kind of see in the poll that this, again, might kind of be an unfamiliar place to be. So we can start to maybe talk about how do we go about activating this soothing system that can have such a benefit to it. And maybe you have some ideas of ways that you can soothe yourself and activate this kind of system, or maybe you're looking to kind of add to that list. So we're having that question of how do I better support myself, or how do I better support somebody else? One way we can activate our soothing system is through a particular way of breathing. When we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, our rate of breathing is often shorter and higher up in our chest. But if we breathe in certain ways that are more soothing, such as kind of down closer to our diaphragm, you may have heard of the term belly breathing before. It's just a different way of sending messages through our body to our brain to say, we're okay, we're safe, we got this, there's no lion here, let's take it down a few notches and move forward. Another way to kind of activate our soothing system could be connecting with pleasant things in our life, whether it be our pets, our loved ones, our own goals and values, or to other pleasant things like nature, which seem to be a theme based on what we just shared in the chat with Hannah. But also knowing that life is inevitably going to happen, and with that comes challenging times. So sometimes it's a question of how do we activate our soothing system within the context of some of those challenging pieces. And this might look like something like visualization. So can we think of a place that feels safe to us and bring that to mind in times when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed? We can also use things like grounding techniques. There's a reason why there's a little tree with roots, meaning that we're grounding ourselves into the present moment, where we are in that present moment, and not focusing on our regrets of the past, our worries of the future, and staying in the present moment, whatever that might look like. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There's just a few ideas about how we can go about activating our soothing system. And as we kind of add to that list, I'd be curious to hear, when you hear this idea of soothing, what are some things that might make you feel soothed, safe, connected, content, whatever that might be? And it doesn't have to be anything drastic, just those things that can bring about that sense of contentment. And similarly, how do you know when that soothing system may have been activated, even if it's something that perhaps doesn't happen as often as they'd like? So similar to what Hannah said, it'd be great if anyone felt comfortable popping in the chat their thoughts around these questions. And it's nice to have it in the chat as kind of a way of seeing ideas from other people when we're acknowledging how important the system can be. Okay, I see making art as a way of soothing. What a wonderful activity to kind of connect with those things that can be beautiful, but also important to you as well. Spending time with family, absolutely. I like this one, making music, another kind of creative one. Those creative pieces, again, can be hard if we're feeling too overwhelmed or too emotional. So using those things to bring in our soothing system. Meditation, and I guess maybe just talking generally about mental health. Thank you, Dr. Abby. Oh, I like this one, giving your best in something, whatever that might be. Just kind of knowing that you're working towards a goal. A self-care routine by sitting in a bath, lovely. Taking that time and connecting with your senses in that way to feel soothed as well. And seeing being creative, cycling, having a good day with your partner. And this person who shares says they know that they're in that zone when they're not worrying about what ifs and what the future holds. Nice. So talking about kind of what that feels like with regards to our thoughts in that moment. Gardening, smelling soil, and hearing birds. A good time of year for that. Excellent. So lots of great ideas. But again, sometimes getting to the point of being able to do those things can be the difficult part if life is tough, as it often is. There's other challenges going on for sure. Okay, and another person saying gardening and being outdoors. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. And maybe you're wondering, what else can I do? And again, we can maybe try to work on creating that list for yourself. And we're going to take some time to go through another mindfulness practice and a similar kind of disclaimer that Cristina had, that if this is something really new to you or unfamiliar, that's okay. And if there's ever any point that feels uncomfortable, you can just kind of come back to your breath and focus on what that feels like. Make it your own. But what this mindfulness practice is going to look at is working with our breathing and breathing in a way that is soothing and calming. So similarly to when we started with Cristina's meditation, we're going to start by sitting comfortably, placing both feet flat on the floor, about shoulder width apart, and resting your hands on your legs. We'll sit upright, our shoulders back and our chest open, keeping a soft and relaxed expression in your face. And if it's accessible to you, closing your eyes or holding a soft gaze at a spot in front of you. And what we can do is just gently focus on our breathing. As you breathe, try to allow the air to come down into your diaphragm at the bottom of your rib cage. A helpful prompt might be to place one hand over your heart and one hand on your belly. Feeling your diaphragm move as you breathe in and out. Perhaps breathing a little faster or a little slower until you find a pattern that for you is soothing and comforting. It's like checking in with the rhythm in your body to see what is soothing and calming to you. What you might find is that your breathing is slightly slower and deeper than normal. Ensure that the breaths in and out are smooth and even. If it's helpful, you can repeat to yourself in a friendly voice on the in-breath, mind slowing down, and on the out-breath, body slowing down. Now we can spend just a little while focusing on our breath, noticing it coming down into the diaphragm lifting, and then the air moving out through your nose. Sometimes it's useful to focus on the point just inside the nose where the air enters. Breathing in for 1, 2, 3. Pausing before exhaling. 3, 2, 1. Noticing if this rate is soothing and comfortable for you. Filling up your lungs as you breathe in and emptying as you breathe out. It should feel slightly different, deeper and slower than normal, but not a struggle. Noticing your mind slowing down and your body as well. We can take a moment to ground ourselves by turning our attention to the body. Sensing the weight of your body resting in the chair and the floor underneath you. Allowing yourself to feel held and supported, coming to rest in the present moment. And remembering that it's perfectly okay for your mind to wander. And just trying to bring your attention back to your body as best you can. And whenever you're ready, allowing your breath to return to its normal rate and gently allowing your eyes to open. Noticing what it felt like to focus on slowing down and how that may have impacted how you feel. So as we bring ourselves back to our virtual room here, I thank everyone for giving that a chance. And we have a few prompting questions on our next slide to kind of reflect on what that was like for you. Again, being able to pop it in the chat if you feel comfortable. Parts that might have been helpful or maybe not so helpful, maybe a bit more challenging. Or if you noticed any particular feelings or sensations come up for you. Or maybe if this is something you think might be helpful for you in the future. If you have any thoughts, popping them into the chat if you feel comfortable. It can also be a kind of personal experience as well, and knowing that you can make it your own. So as we said, even just being able to connect with your breath in a slower and deeper way in times when feeling distressed or overwhelmed can be a helpful kind of first step before trying to move forward. And I see a few comments now saying feeling relaxed. And I'll echo Jenna again that if you don't feel relaxed, that's okay too. Thank you everyone for taking a moment to participate in the mindfulness practice. And we'll just, oh, I see more here. Body is warmed up and a nice benefit from a brief meditation. Thank you, everyone. And we'll just wrap up by commenting on the relationship between these three systems we've talked about today. And if we think back to what Cristina had shared with the 3 circles, maybe there's a question of how do we have that balance between the 3, rather than perhaps having those 2 reflected in the pole be much larger than our soothing one. But also acknowledging that, especially if you're someone living with a mental health concern or a caregiver, that accessing that soothing system, again, can feel quite unfamiliar or hard to access, or that if you do, it might even feel a bit threatening or uncomfortable. I'm seeing a comment now, someone saying that they had trouble shutting off their mind during that practice. And I think when we take those moments to try to let our guard down, we can sometimes feel additional thoughts or have additional thoughts or feel additional feelings that can be challenging. So just acknowledging that everyone's systems look different and the way that they activate them can look different as well. So finding those strategies that work well for you is important.